When the San Francisco Bulls were announced as one of what would be four expansion ECHL franchises in September of 2011, the news was met with fairly muted optimism. People in the big city aren't going to get overly excited about minor league hockey, and that was certainly the case here. Yet despite this, when the team folded during its second season over at the Cal Palace, many were just left scratching their head wondering where it all went wrong. Despite good marketing, community outreach, solid attendance numbers, and an okay enough on-ice product, the Bulls were unable to make things work, although it wasn't exactly all the team's fault. Dreams were bulldozed by a building that was bullying, wanting more gold bullions. The Cal Palace was no bulwark. Then again, ownership had the brains of bullfrogs. Here's a bulletin: a prick from the bullbriar is bad, but a lash from the bullwhip worse. Those in the city were bull rushed by a bullet sans butterfly wings. Sorry, Billy. Don't look now, but Dusty's going to the bullpen. The idea was bullish, maybe even bull-headed. The end, that was certainly bullshit. This, though, is the story of the Bulls, San Francisco's last hockey team.
I'm going top shelf. No, you're not.
Before I begin, a quick shout out to @SJSharksHistory over on Twitter for mentioning this story to me some time ago. It did take me a while, but here we are. And if you like old photos of the Sharks, as well as factoids from the team's history, like I myself do, then I suggest you go check them out on Twitter. The link to that is in the description of this video. Let's just start by stating the obvious. Hockey in San Francisco has never worked over the long term. Now, there are reasons for this, but things just haven't gone well when a team has come to town. The San Francisco Shamrocks started play in 1944, but they wouldn't make it past the end of the decade. The Seals were next. They were successful early on in San Francisco, but team principal Barry Van Gervig would receive an expansion franchise from the NHL. When that happened, he opted to move the side over to Oakland and their brand new venue, as opposed to staying at the Cow Palace. Another different version of the Shamrock starts up in the 1970s, but they're gone after a couple of seasons, and then you get the San Jose Sharks. They set up shop at the Cow Palace for their first two seasons as they waited for the arena in San Jose to be completed. This was just a wild, crazy, fun experience by all accounts. People who saw the team at the Cow Palace loved it, but they also knew the team was there for a good time, not a long time. With the NHL team having moved out but leaving behind some hockey-related improvements to the Cow Palace, an International Hockey League expansion franchise is granted to the city, and we get the San Francisco Spiders. Despite having Bruce Boudreau as an assistant coach and a really cool logo, SF Spiders shirts and jerseys available over at Royal Retros. Use the promo code TOUCHBACK and get a 10% discount off your next purchase. Link in the description of this video. What was I talking about again? Oh, yes, the Spiders. Very cool logo. The team only lasts one season, and they lose millions of dollars during that campaign. Home attendance for the Spiders at the Cow Palace was actually pretty good during the weekends, but no one would turn up for weeknight contests, which there were quite a few of. The Spiders shut down, and then for 15 years, there's no hockey in San Francisco. Then we get another soul who wants to make it work. This time, his name was Pat Curcio. Old Pat would not only be the team's founder and owner, but he was the San Francisco Bulls team president, general manager, and head coach. A lot of hats, but he did have some experience, at least with some of those roles. Curcio had played minor league hockey as well as in Europe and had spent nearly a decade coaching at various minor league teams in the US and Canada. He gets a group of investors together, some from his native Canada, others from the States, and they would secure an expansion franchise with the ECHL. Their choice as for where this team would play was San Francisco, a decision that makes some sense on the surface. It's a big market, and there was a building ready for use in the Cow Palace. Let's be real though, the selling point here was San Francisco. A lot of the investors probably didn't know a hell of a lot about all of these smaller ECHL towns. So when Curcio approached him and says, we're going to put a team in San Francisco, it resonated. If he tried to do that with, say, Fresno and Selland Arena, I don't know if he gets as many people on board to help him finance this team. The problem is that the Cow Palace could host hockey, but it was not ready to host games by this point in time. Getting it ready for prime time, it just turns into this huge money pit for the investment group. Seriously, they would have been better off just buying a boat. First, the Cow Palace used compressors and chillers that were powered by ammonia, technology that had been outlawed and just really wasn't very cool. I mean, figuratively speaking, not cool. Literally, yes, it could keep stuff cool, assuming it didn't leak and kill everyone in the process. Then it turns out the team needs to build a special scoreboard for the Cow Palace because the roof could only handle so much weight. And the sound system needed to be upgraded, so too the locker rooms, both the home and away locker rooms, they needed improvements. Curcio and the investment group also wanted to make a few adjustments to the Cow Palace setup for hockey that would make it more friendly for fans. When all was said and done, the Bulls had poured in more than $2 million of their own money to make the Cow Palace a suitable hockey venue. That, of course, was in addition to what they had to pay to rent the Cow Palace, as well as the percentage of related revenue from ticket sales and concession and whatnot that also were directed to the building. Despite a pretty favorable agreement for them, those running the Cow Palace were very nonplussed about all of this, but we'll get to that later on in this story. Before the first puck dropped, Curcio admitted that he and the other investors probably wouldn't have picked San Francisco and the Cow Palace had they known it needed so much work. That, of course, begs the question, why didn't they do this research beforehand? Why didn't they figure this stuff out before they started putting money into the project? You know what, though? It was not all bad news for Curcio and the investment group. They would sign an affiliation agreement with the San Jose Sharks a few months before the season began, meaning the Bay Area's NHL team would have their prospects playing just up the road. The Bulls would get an even bigger boost on September 15th, 2012, when the NHL locked out its players again, proving once more that Gary Bettman just hates the sport of hockey. For the minor league club, this would mean they were the only game in town, not a bad position to be in. So before we talk about the inaugural San Francisco Bulls season, we really need to talk about their color scheme and logo. Their colors are orange, black, and gold, which Curcio has mentioned was for the San Francisco Giants and 49ers. Of course, they ended up just looking like the Anaheim Ducks of this time period, only with more orange. Then there is this logo. It just looks like a really cheap rip-off version of the Rock's Brahma Bull logo and tattoo. The team's issue is that for whatever reason they felt compelled to rush out the jerseys, the logo, and color scheme before inking that agreement with the Sharks. Had they waited until afterwards, I'm guessing you get something that aligns a little more closely with their parent club. Instead, they just are boxed in with this orange, black, gold. It doesn't really look all of that great. It's kind of confusing, and I mean, it's just sort of there. That aside, the team really goes all out. They are all around town trying to spread the word about the upcoming season during the summer and fall. They work with local luminaries like Bruce Bochy,
The San Francisco Bulls are bringing pro hockey back to the Cow Palace.
Christy Yamaguchi, and Stomper, among others.
The San Francisco Bulls are bringing pro hockey back to the Cow Palace.
There were lots of local media spots. They even held a contest at Pier 39 to find who would sing national anthems during upcoming Bulls games that season. Although I'm still not sure why like is in parentheses in this ad. Do you not want us to do that? Was there some alternative meaning to the word like on Facebook that I just simply wasn't aware of? What are these parentheses doing here? Anyway, Curcio and the marketing teams for the Bulls do an outstanding job of spreading the word about the team through just about every medium that exists during this time. That really is half of the battle in a city like San Francisco, where you have so much going on all of the time. You need to spread the word. You need to make sure folks know when and where you're playing. And I think that's one thing you can say the Bulls did extremely well. Beyond that, the Bulls secured local radio and TV deals for further exposure. And after a few preseason matches, it was time for the real deal. The home opener, the first game in San Francisco Bulls history, would take place on a Friday night against the Bakersfield Condors. More than 8,000 fans showed up. The Bulls lost 4-3, but the reviews were generally positive. The two teams would go on to play again the next day, and attendance was actually less than half of the home opener. This has to be one of the biggest issues with the ECHL. I understand why the team does these back-to-backs. It's a huge money saver. Logistically, it's easier. I totally get that. Yet, I also feel like it does create this scenario where fans are going to be less interested and less involved when there's the same team in town playing twice in 2 days. It's just a redundant situation, and I think a lot of people, a lot of potential attendees, just don't want to go to both games if they're seeing the exact same thing 2 days in a row. Unfortunately, the team would then go on a San Antonio Spurs-esque 9-game road trip when the National Grand Rodeo would take its rightful place at the Cow Palace. The lengthy road trip spanning more than 3 weeks, it doesn't really dampen interest in the club. In fact, more than 6,000 people would show up for the Bulls' next contest at home. Perhaps the pinnacle for the San Francisco Bulls would come in December of that first season, and in San Jose of all places. The Sharks, looking to placate fans unhappy with the continued NHL lockout, invited the Bulls down to host one of their games at the Shark Tank. The parent club also gave away tickets to this game. Like, no one paid the team for tickets. Now, there were some stories about resale tickets being made available, but yeah, if you were a fan and you could get a hold of the ticket office, chances are you could see the Bulls play for free on this day. A lot of people would take them up on that offer. More than 12,000 folks showed up for an ECHL match at the Shark Tank. It was a cool experience for everyone involved. In many ways, though, this would be the high point for the San Francisco Bulls, even if no one knew it at the time. A few nights later, the Bulls draw less than 3,000 people for their next game at the Cow Palace. By January, the NHL lockout had ended and the league had begun its own truncated season. This has been cited as a reason why Bulls attendance declined in the second half of their first season, although I don't know if it's as cut and dry as that. A bigger issue was that the Bulls had more weekday night games towards the back end of this first year. The Cow Palace is not close to a BART station, and it's not particularly easy to get to via buses or whatever. You know, getting from the main part of San Francisco out to Daly City, it's a chore on weeknights with all of the traffic. And I think for the Bulls to still get 2,500 during these weekday night games, it was really nothing to sneeze at, all things considered. Attendance did fluctuate quite a bit for the remainder of that first season. There were good games where the team would draw 6,000 plus and a few nights in the low 2,000s. Results on the ice, not all that great. They would finish on 59 points, which was second to last in their division above only Bakersfield, yet they would somehow make the playoffs because all but one team in each of the divisions of the ECHL qualified for the postseason. They did win a playoff game, but were knocked out by the Alaska Aces. While their play on the ice was lackluster, the off-ice financial performance for the San Francisco Bulls, that was disastrous. It was reported that the club lost around $2 million in that first campaign. Despite struggles and losing money, everyone was relatively happy enough to keep things going, and the Bulls would get a crack at a second season. The 2013-14 campaign starts with 8 consecutive road games as the rodeo bumps the Bulls out of town. More than 5,000 fans showed up for the side's home opener, but things quickly go downhill from here. About 1,500 or so forlorn souls showed up for a Wednesday before Thanksgiving game. Their next home match, 2 weeks later, it barely breaks the 2,000 mark, and then a week later, their next contest, well, that struggles to draw in 1,000 folks. The situation, attendance-wise, is getting pretty dire. Everything comes to a head mid-January of 2014 when half of the team's investors pull out. The main issue the team faces are onerous terms with the Cow Palace. According to Curcio, it's costing the team around $30,000 to run the building each game. That is about 2 to 3 times more than the average ECHL franchise. They had actually gone to the Cow Palace trying to get some sort of break because their funds were dwindling, and with investors pulling out, it really made it hard for them to have liquidity at this time. The team's argument was, look at all of this stuff we've invested for your barn that helps your operations, things that the Bulls could not simply take with them somewhere else. I mean, apart from the scoreboard, more or less everything else was going to be staying at the Cow Palace. Those running the building, though, had zero sympathy. In fact, they basically told Curcio that he was free to move the team. Then, in a media interview with the San Francisco Examiner, Cal Palace manager Ken Allstott told the paper that he didn't think minor league hockey would ever work in San Francisco. He added he didn't care if the team left and that the venue was already looking for new events to replace potential Bulls games that hadn't even been canceled yet. Just so the situation is perfectly clear, the Cal Palace was more than happy to let the Bulls invest all of this money on upgrades for an endeavor that they thought wasn't going to work in the first place. Then, when they just needed a little relief, a little break to see through the second season, they were like, why don't you go put an egg in your shoe and beat it? That is just legendary dickish move from the Cow Palace right there. As for those in charge of the hockey team finding no sympathy from the Cow Palace, they spend a whirlwind week and a half trying to find a new place to play. New ownership group, or both. One plan would have seen the Bulls finish out their season in Oakland, although it's never really clear just how far those plans got, and there were going to be complications with the Golden State Warriors. More realistic were attempts to sell the Bulls to a Fresno-based group and move them to Selland Arena. The city had an ECHL franchise up until 2009 and had spent heavily on hockey-focused renovations for that building a few years earlier. For whatever reason, those plans never get over the line. And then on January 28th, 2014, the decision is made to have the San Francisco Bulls cease operations with immediate effect. Their last home game was a 5-4 overtime win against Colorado almost 2 weeks earlier in front of about 1,200 people. Their last game ever would be a shootout win against the Stockton Thunder. Yanni Gourde and Torrey Mitchell were the most famous NHLers to suit up for the Bulls, although the latter only played 2 games for them. More or less, though, these were just a bunch of career minor leaguers or guys who maybe had a cup of coffee at the pros. Everyone just sort of goes their separate way once the team folds. Players filter out to other AHL sides or eventually head overseas. Curcio himself goes on to coach in Europe for a few years before getting caught up in the huge cesspool scam that is cryptocurrency. Come on, dog. Retweeting Andrew Tate's thoughts on Bitcoin, that cannot be what your life has become. Things cannot be this bad. Seriously. I mean, this is some Mike Babcock level nonsense right here. The story of the San Francisco Bulls is a weird one. I can't help but think the idea on paper was a noble one. Bringing minor league hockey to San Francisco was interesting and could have potentially worked. You also have to commend the ownership group for not only putting so much of their own money into Cow Palace renovations, but just doing an excellent job of marketing that team and trying to connect with the local community. I mean, everything the San Francisco Deltas would do wrong a few years later, the Bulls did right, well, apart from the logo. And yes, make no mistake, the Cow Palace totally boned over the Bulls in the end. They probably could have helped out. There probably was a solution to be found if those running the building wanted to make things work. They did not, though. Yet, though, I get this suspicion, this inclination that those running the San Francisco Bulls, especially Pat Curcio, just were not very good with money. Like, how do you decide to bring an ECHL team to San Francisco without first getting an estimate? Just how much is it going to cost to renovate the Cow Palace for hockey? How much do you need to make per game? Seriously, it feels as if no one ever knew what the break-even point was for the Bulls. How much money did they need to make to be successful? How many tickets did they need to sell each game? What was the number for concessions? What was the merch total? I don't know if the numbers would have ever worked for ECHL hockey in San Francisco, but more worryingly, I don't think Curcio and the investment group ever knew. Then you look at the path he's gone down and the kind of things he's up to today, and you're sort of like, yeah, I guess it kind of does make sense after all. This is a team that lost upwards of $6 million over the course of about 2 years. That's crazy, but what's even more crazy about all of this is investing so much money in an endeavor that was never ever going to be able to recoup $6 million. The ECHL was awash with franchises coming and going during this period. This was not a can't miss financial opportunity. This was something that a few people broke even, maybe 1 or 2 made some money, but by and large, the end result for most owners of minor league hockey teams was losing money. Sadly, it was the loyal, passionate San Francisco hockey fans who were hurt most by this decision. Attendance ebbed and flowed during the team's existence, and by the end, it was getting pretty dire. Yet there was still that group, that gaggle of hardcore fans who would turn out for the Bulls come hell or high water. They loved their home team, they loved having the ECHL, although neither is likely to return. My favorite part of the team story, it's this. One of those old San Francisco Bulls employees managed to still maintain control of the team's Twitter account and occasionally post over there to this day. More than a decade later, the SF Bulls on Twitter are still posting. Now that's loyalty. Thank you for watching this video. If you would like to learn more about the weird, wild story of the San Jose Sharks expansion draft, that would be the video in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is the Touchback, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.